Good morning. I think that what I'm about to report to you will get many of you very angry with me because it will be countering the narrative which you've been hearing over and over and over, not just in the recent days, but over the many years leading up to this situation. And so people tend to repeat what they hear in the narrative without even thinking about it. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization. This is your daily update for September 15th, 2025, and I'm going to be talking about what is being said about the Charlie Kirk assassination. Now, the whole point of narrative is to spin a tale which is tailored to fit the pre-existing beliefs of the targeted audience. The concept is that you take existing fault lines and exacerbate them, make them worse, to increase the polarization, and if possible, to provoke an angry response in which members of the audience give up critical thinking and adapt their beliefs to their profile and their chosen enemy image. In the case of the Kirk assassination, this has been absolutely clear if you've been following the media lines in major media, left and right publications, podcasters, and so on. Before the full story is known, we had a line that this is a left-right issue, that what you hear from the right is that the left provoked the assassination because Charlie Kirk was an effective organizer for the Trump policy. But we're also told that this was had nothing to do with a bigger situation, but had only to do with his role in the establishment of a movement of conservatives. So even before the facts were in, and some of these things we're told may be true, it may be that the person who pulled the trigger has leftist beliefs or pro-gay beliefs or something of that sort. And as a result, we have predictions of a civil war. But is it the whole story? And that's what I'm going to focus on right now. We don't know the motivation of the person who pulled the trigger, but most people assume he's anti-Trump because Kirk is identified, as I said, with the policies of President Trump. And this, of course, is also generally true, but there were some differences. In fact, recently, he drew a distinction between his support for Trump and his opposition to more funding for the Ukraine war and for the Israeli government, as well as opposition to the Justice Department handling of the Epstein case. But here's the point. The narratives are spun for a different purpose, to divert attention away from the big picture. And what is the big picture? There's a global transformation underway, a break with the policies of the global banks and the narrative of the Great Reset. There's a move to undermine the colonial policy, the neo-colonial policy of the last 500 years, centered around the Russia, China, India, BRICS, and Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And there's a possibility that the US and the West could join the BRICS to establish a new global economic development architecture, or get provoked into a war, as we see with the Ukraine situation leading to a possible NATO versus Russia war. So the idea is that if you want to stop this transformation, get people focused on narrow interests and narrow issues. Now, we at the Executive Intelligence Review and the LaRouche Organization have repeatedly demonstrated that such events, including assassinations, false flag attacks, terrorism, and so on, are often run by the deep state, by the secret government, the CIA, MI6, to use puppets to act, to hide the real intent of the establishment. That is, if they told you that the reason they're preparing to go to war with Russia is to protect the bankrupt banks and to make sure that the deficit falls on the population and not the bankers, they're willing to provoke wars. Now, the idea is they want to hide the real intent of the establishment. I'll just give you a few recent examples. the John F. Kennedy assassination. Why was that covered up? Why was there a lie? Well, because Kennedy was changing U.S. policy away from the Cold War toward normalization of relations with Russia. And so we're told a lone assassin, who, by the way, was Oswald a leftist or a rightist? Was he opposing Cuba or for Cuba? Well, that's the way these things work. Take 9/11. The whole story of Osama bin Laden flying out of a bat cave to destroy the Twin Towers. Well, there are many holes that have been poked in that theory. And a lot of people believe that this was something that was orchestrated or at least allowed to happen for the sake of what? Moving toward a global police state, a surveillance state, data collection, and so on. That's what Edward Snowden said. That's what LaRouche said in January 2001, right before Bush was inaugurated, that there would be a Reichstag fire event to allow for emergency decrees, supposedly to fight against terrorism. Or take the 2014 Ukraine coup. We're told it was Soviet-backed government of Yanukovych, a probable communist, versus freedom and democracy. And what was left out is that the so-called freedom and democracy was employing neo-Nazi units of the Bandera brigades to carry out a coup to move NATO closer to the border of Russia. So without having this bigger picture, what happened? We've been spending hundreds of billions of dollars for a war that's of no consequence or no benefit for the people of the United States in Ukraine. Same thing with Israel. If you look at Hamas, you find that Hamas was funded lavishly by the Netanyahu government. Over $1 billion went to Hamas to divide the Palestinian Arab population. Now, what is this actually about? This is something called the strategy of tension. And I'll read you a quote about what the strategy of tension is. It's a form of hybrid warfare where information is manipulated for the purposes of taking people's eyes off what's being done to them. And this is a definition. The strategy of tension, which comes from the Italian strategia della tensione, because there were a lot of left-right terror activities in Italy after 1967. The strategy of tension is a political policy that encourages violent struggle to create a climate of fear and insecurity, leading the public to seek security in a strong national security state. It involves deployment of state or non-state actors to promote violence and create chaos to manipulate public perception and political outcomes. That's what happened after 9/11. Listen to this again. It encourages a violent struggle to create a climate of fear and insecurity, leading the public to seek security in a strong national security state. Well, that includes surveillance. That includes policies of jailing and police state actions and censorship. And so this is what we're facing right now. And what's the intent? To increase the polarization and to obscure from view the real global strategic fight underway, which is the emergence of a new economic paradigm and a break with 500 years of colonialism, of European colonialism controlled by the dominant City of London and Wall Street banks. Now, it's in the interest of everyone to take power away from this deep state. That's what President Trump said he was going to do. To take it away from the corrupt establishment, which is willing to provoke nuclear war if necessary to save their system. Now, let me give you another precedent for this, because what we're seeing is that these operations are designed to take your eyes off this real historic battle underway and orient you to fight against those who actually share your common interests. So let's take the example of what happened in 2008 to 2011. The mortgage-backed securities bubble collapse. Lyndon LaRouche forecast that in 2007, and he put forward an economic policy which would have reversed it. The return to Glass-Steagall economic regulation so that the bankers would not end up creating funny money for speculative purposes, such as the mortgage-backed securities. When the bubble popped, what happened? Well, LaRouche said it was doomed to collapse. What was the establishment planning? Bail out the bubble. Talk about protecting the too big to fail banks, that your pension depends on protecting these banks. That's what they said. Yet these banks ran fraudulent, corrupt policies which led to an inflationary bubble and a collapse. So there were 20-some plus trillion dollars that went into bailing out the banks. And what happened to the people who had the mortgages? 5 to 7 million families had their homes foreclosed. They lost jobs. They lost everything. And what did they do? Well, you had two different movements start. One in 2009 was the Tea Party, which said that the problem was government spending. Well, it wasn't just government spending, it was the Federal Reserve, I should say, making credit available to speculators and not to the real physical economy. But the Tea Party said, no, it's spending on welfare, it's spending on foreign aid and so on. And so you had a whole section of the country, the so-called right, demanding an end to government spending. Then in 2011, Occupy Wall Street was set up, supposedly the left. And what did Occupy Wall Street say? Punish the banks, jail the bankers. Now, here's the interesting thing. Both the left and the right, Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party, opposed the bailout, didn't they? And both of them also opposed Obamacare as a fraud run on behalf of Big Pharma. But what happened? They fought each other. I was at the state capitol in Austin, Texas, when there was a march on one side of the rotunda for Occupy Wall Street and on the other side for the Tea Party. And as they were yelling at each other, I jumped in front of them and I said, look, how many of you oppose the bailout? Every hand went up. How many of you oppose Obamacare? Every hand went up. I said, how about working together? And there was a moment where it looked like people were thinking about it. But instead, the polarization came back in. And so they fought each other. That's what is being done with the Charlie Kirk assassination. And it's a dishonor to Charlie's memory that he's being held up as a central point in what could become a civil war to destroy our country. Now, I'll have more on this tomorrow. There'll be more coming out from EIR. I would suggest that you subscribe to the EIR Daily Alert so you keep getting these daily updates. Don't fall for the strategy of tension. We have a world to change, and it's going to be changed not by violent, fake issues, but by a thoughtful approach to addressing the real problem, which is the control of the world by a gang of gangsters masquerading as an establishment of bankers, lawyers, and corporate cartels.